Welcome to another slow and soothing journey into the quieter corners of human history. As the evening settles in and the world around you begins to dim, allow yourself to drift softly, slowly, into a time long past. Tonight we turn our gaze to the Middle Ages, but not the clashing swords or the galloping knights you may know from bedtime tales. No, this is a gentler tale, a slower one of kitchens and markets, herbs and incense, hay-stuffed beds, and flickering rushlights. The theme tonight may raise a curious brow, what was getting high like in the medieval world, but rest assured we will not rush to scandal or thrill. Instead, we will calmly explore the role of herbs, elixirs, fumes, and fermented dreams. A world where altered states of mind were not just moments of escape, but deeply woven into daily life, medicine, religion, and ritual. We will begin, as always, with the rhythm of everyday existence of peasants and their smoky hearths, of apothecaries and wandering monks, of wise women and weary pilgrims. Then we will meet a person of history, one who dwelled in this strange space between pain and pleasure, sacred and forbidden, a historical figure whose life was touched by the power of ancient plants and curious potions. Later we will unravel one of history's murkier questions. What did people truly believe about the substances that changed their minds, their spirits, even their sense of reality? Was it divine inspiration or something darker? And finally, we will lift the curtain to peer into the contrasting world of the elites. What did the lords and ladies do when they wished to forget the world, or reshape it? But let us begin slowly. Let us sink into the soil of the fields, the scent of the hearth, the feel of linen and dust. Welcome to the Middle Ages. Welcome to calm, boring, sleepy history. Imagine yourself in a small medieval village, not the grand halls of castles, but the humbler edge of a forest where timber-framed cottages huddle together for warmth. The year is uncertain. It may be 1172 or 1341 or any other century in that long stretch we call the Middle Ages. Time here does not hurry. The rhythm is steady like a creaking cartwheel over hardened earth. Your day begins not with a jolt, but with the first glow of light filtering through a greased parchment window. There is no alarm, only the crow of a distant rooster and the slow rising groans of the house around you. You rise from a straw mattress, stiff with sleep, and wrap yourself in rough spun wool. The air is cold, always cold in the morning, and heavy with the mingled smell of ashes and animals. In this world, people lived closely with each other and with the earth. Line between the medicinal and the spiritual was blurred, and within that quiet blend there existed another blurred line between the waking mind and something altered. Inside the home, a central hearth smolders. Dried herbs hang from the rafters, not for decoration, but for use. Mugwort, henbane, poppy heads, valerian plants, whose names today might whisper danger or healing, but then were simply familiar. Tea as we know it had not arrived, but people drank infusions, steeping herbs in warm ale or water. Not necessarily to escape, but to dull pain, ease sleep, quiet the nerves, to calm the belly after spoiled bread, to hush a child's cough, to soothe a weary mother. The line between getting well and getting high was not firm. Many of these plants had subtle effects, not euphoric, more like a fog, slowly wrapping the senses. A pleasant float, perhaps, a bit more laughter around the evening fire. The air inside the cottage was often filled with smoke, not only from the fire, but from incense, resinous woods, and dried herbs burned deliberately. Some believed the smoke drove away illness. Others said it carried prayers to the heavens. but for many, it simply filled the air with a soft haze, comforting warm, just enough to soften the world. Outside, the labor was relentless, turning soil, tending to livestock, weaving, baking, fetching water. But even here, people used the tools they had to find a gentler state. Ale was a constant companion, safer than water, and warming, brewed thick and low in alcohol. It was consumed by adults and children alike. But in times of surplus, stronger drinks emerged, and with them a different kind of evening. In the corners of rural Europe, wise women, often midwives or herbalists, held quiet knowledge. They prepared potions for childbirth, pain for visions, for sleeplessness, recipes passed down in murmurs over centuries. Some included roots that dulled the senses. Others brought strange dreams. Sometimes these brews were used during festivals. Beltane Samhain, times when the veil between worlds was thought to thin, a cup of something bitter, a pipe of something sweet, and the mind would drift just a little further than usual. It wasn't escape in the way we might imagine it today. It was integration. The altered mind wasn't an outsider. It was part of the world, a tool, a necessity, a comfort. And so, in the flickering twilight, you may find yourself seated by the hearth, sipping a mixture of wormwood and honey, staring into the coals. The children are sleeping, the air is heavy with herbs, and the world they hoard feels distant, soft around the edges. This was daily life. This was getting by. And in small, quiet ways, this was getting high. Now that we've settled into the daily rhythms of medieval life, we gently shift our gaze to a woman who stood at the crossroads of mysticism, medicine, and mind-altering experience. Her name was Hildegard of Bingen. You may not have heard her name before, but imagine a tall abbess, robed in dark wool, walking through a stone cloister lined with herbs. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of lavender and yarrow. This was her world, half garden, half cloister, entirely devoted to what she called divine illumination. Hildegard lived in the 12th century in what is now Germany. She was a Benedictine abbess, a composer, a healer, a philosopher, and a visionary. Not metaphorically, but quite literally. From early childhood, Hildegard experienced what she described as bursts of living light, visions filled with sound, color, and intricate symbols. These visions were so vivid, so consuming, that they often left her physically exhausted. Today, some have speculated about migraines, epilepsy, or even hallucinogenic triggers. But Hildegard herself believed gently, firmly, that she was merely a vessel, that what she saw came from a place beyond the world, and crucially, she wrote them down. She described her experiences with a calm, matter-of-fact tone. No fear, no urgency, just flowing waves of color and meaning recorded in works like Civius, which means know the ways. Within these pages, she detailed an entire cosmology of stars, of spheres, of divine feminine wisdom. Her visions weren't frantic. They were serene, ordered, luminous. In her monastery, Hildegard cultivated not just theology but plants. Her medical texts remain some of the most extensive of the Middle Ages. She cataloged the properties of fennel, of dill, of poppy, and mandrake, not simply as healers of the body, but as balancers of the soul. Mandrake, she noted, should be handled carefully. It could bring rest or disorientation. Poppy was to be taken in moderation for pain of the head or body. Mugwort, she said, had powers of vision and clarity, particularly when burned. But she always warned too much, and the humors will tip. In her time, these substances were not recreational. They were sacred, therapeutic, and sometimes risky. There were no chemists, no labels. Only intuition, experience, and the slow testing of generations. Hildegard walked that fine line between mysticism and medicine, between trance and prayer. Imagine her in the scriptorium, scratching ink onto parchment by candlelight. Outside, the wind pushes gently against stained glass. The scent of crushed mint lingers on her fingers. She pauses not from doubt, but from another vision, a soft blaze of gold behind her closed eyes. She writes again. It's not that Hildegard sought ecstasy. It's that the world around her already shimmered with the sacred. And sometimes to glimpse it, one had to quiet the body or stir it gently with the aid of nature's more curious gifts. She composed music, two long, unhurried chants that rose and fell like breathing. Listening to them today feels like floating, like standing in a forest chapel as light filters through tall trees. It is perhaps another form of high, a spiritual one. In Hildegard's world-altered states weren't escapes. They were entrances into divine knowledge, sacred rhythm, and subtle transformation. And so we remember her not just as a nun or healer, but as someone who opened herself fully to what she called the living light, a quiet explorer of the mind, a calm chronicler of visions, a woman who lived not on the edge of madness, but in the gentle glow of mystery. Let us now drift further into a space between the known and the obscure, where rituals whisper through ruined monasteries and ancient vessels hold forgotten residues. This is the realm of mystery, not just spiritual, but chemical, botanical, and cultural, a quiet alchemy that lies beneath recorded history. For centuries, medieval people engaged in subtle practices that we today might describe as mind-altering. But these experiences were not recreational in the modern sense. They were ceremonial, contextual, and sometimes deeply sacred. Archaeologists have begun to uncover traces, residues, clinging to pottery shards, texts hiding recipes in plain sight, and paintings that suggest smoke vapor and trance. But these hints are fragmentary, like the fading echo of a long-forgotten chant. One example takes us to medieval monasteries where monks distilled herbal elixirs not only for healing, but perhaps also for inner exploration. Wormwood, for instance, later known for its role in absinthe, was already known, not banned, not feared, simply used and understood. In moderation, it soothed digestion. In stronger doses, it opened the door to strange dreams. In village rituals, especially in Celtic and Germanic regions, there were bonfires, Beltane, midsummer, solstice vigils. People danced through smoke infused with mugwort or sweet flag. Herbs were not merely symbolic. They were aromatic, intoxicating, meant to carry prayers and perhaps the mind upward. We also find quiet clues in the burial grounds of medieval apothecaries. Small glass vials still sealed, buried. Alongside their owners, analysis shows traces of opium, cannabis, and belladonna plants with potent properties. Were these medicines very likely, but perhaps also tools of altered experience? Belladonna, or beautiful lady, was infamous. A single drop could dilate the eyes. A few more could blur the line between waking and dreaming. In folklore, it was said to aid in flying ointments, those infamous mixtures associated with witches, midwives, and wise women. These ointments were not for broomsticks. They were topical concoctions absorbed through the skin, perhaps bringing on sensations of floating flight or visions. The Church over time began to associate these practices with heresy. But before fear replaced familiarity, many communities accepted such uses as simply part of life-sleep aids, spiritual gateways, a mother's relief from grief, a monk's way of drawing nearer to the divine. There were also communal experiences, feasts, fasts, pilgrimages. Hunger itself can shift perception. Long walks, repetitive prayers, singing in echoing cathedrals. All of these too were gentle ways of changing the state of the mind. Imagine the ancient stone halls of a priory at night. Candles flicker. A group of pilgrims has arrived weary from weeks of walking. They are offered mead steeped with rosemary, a soft, calming drink, and then they are led to a chapel where chants repeat in an endless circle. Latin words, the same phrase again and again. It is not exciting, but it is powerful, lulling trance-like. Even in folk traditions, we find mention of ale brewed with henbane, sometimes accidentally. The drinker would feel warm, then floaty, then perhaps a little unwell, but the experience lingered in memory, sometimes recounted as mystical, sometimes as comic, and always these substances were integrated into the rhythms of life. No fanfare, no labels, just part of the world's quiet complexity. Today, science is beginning to catch up with the traces left behind. Mass spectrometry can tell us what was in those ancient bowls. Linguists are rereading old herbals with new eyes. Anthropologists whisper that what we thought was superstition may have been chemistry. But these were not loud experiments. No neon signs, no thunderclaps. Just slowly steeped leaves, burned resins, prayers, breathed into steam. There is a comforting mystery here, a world where the sacred and the sensory entwined, where the goal was not escape but balance, not thrill but stillness. And in these findings, these forgotten brews and sacred herbs, we catch a glimpse of a softer way of being altered, one that speaks in quiet tones under low ceilings beside embers and stone. And now we ascend gently, slowly, from the hearths of peasants and monks to the candlelit chambers of nobility. The lords and ladies of medieval Europe lived in a different rhythm. Their days were marked not by toil, but by ceremony, not by hunger, but by indulgence. And yes, even their ways of altering the mind were different. Imagine a grand hall in a stone castle, long tables groaning under platters of roasted meat and spiced wine. Tapestries line the walls, muffling the cold. Musicians play a soft, repetitive melody in a corner. The air is thick not with labor, but with luxury. For the elite, access was never a problem. Spices from the east, wines from distant vineyards, herbs from monastic gardens, all were within reach. And with these came mixtures sometimes pleasant, sometimes peculiar. The upper classes did not seek the altered mind through hardship or ritual. They preferred comfort, velvet robes, perfumed oils, and cup after cup of mulled wine, sometimes infused with mandrake or opium. A fashionable trend whispered about in courts was the consumption of syrups, medicinal tonics with sweetened herbs, drawn from Arabic medical texts that flowed into Europe during the Crusades. Some of these syrups were known to calm the nerves, others dulled pain. A few, like Theriac, a complex mixture of over 60 ingredients, claimed to cure everything from melancholy to poison. Rich in opium and myrrh, Theriac was prized as a panacea. Kings hoarded it, nobles gifted it, and those who took it often slept long and deep. Imagine Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine sipping wine laced with imported saffron and a touch of datura, given as a comfort tonic, not to forget, but to soften, to endure the pressures of diplomacy, court politics, and the endless, restless pageantry. Unlike the peasantry, who might use these substances quietly, the elite often wrapped their use in ritual and luxury. A court physician might prepare a special blend for sleep. An astrologer might recommend an herb to align one's spirit with Saturn. A lady's maid might set a room with poppy petals and frankincense, simply because it pleased her mistress' mood. Among the clergy at high levels, things were more complicated. Technically, many substances were frowned upon. But in private, some cardinals were known to use calming decoctions for their nerves. The pressures of church politics were many, and the availability of remedies was just as generous as in any court. In the Islamic courts of medieval Spain, which heavily influenced European culture, the line between science and spirit was especially fluid. Physicians there used cannabis, among other herbs, for headaches, stress, and what they called troubled sleep. Translations of their work crept into Latin Europe, quietly, carefully adopted by learned men and their patrons. There were darker examples too. Some nobles sought aphrodisiacs that dulled inhibition. Others used opiates not for healing, but for oblivion. The line was always delicate. One sip too many and the balance tipped, but as with everything in elite society, appearance mattered. The potion might be potent, but it must be served in crystal. The effect might be strong, but the expression always composed. This was a world of velvet comfort and controlled escape, a high not of desperation, but of decadence. In one account from the Burgundian court, nobles would dine late into the night, and then retire to chambered rooms hung with embroidered linens. Their attendants would heat aromatic oils, mix calming herbs with warmed wine, and soothe their masters into a dreamlike state. No frenzy, just the soft dimming of the senses. And in contrast to the wild festivals of the countryside, elite altered states were quieter, subtler, less about vision, more about rest. They too had dreams, but theirs came not from hunger or trance. They came from imported jars, silver flasks, and carefully measured powders. In this final contrast, we see the full shape of medieval life, from the muddy fields to the carved wooden beds of lords and queens. Everyone at times sought comfort, escape, a softening of the world's weight. Whether in a mug of ale or a crystal phial, the desire was the same: a moment of peace, a brief altered pause in a difficult world. And so our slow journey through the misty landscapes of the medieval mind draws to a close. We began in the quiet morning of a peasant's cottage, where herbs hung low from the beams, and the smoke from the hearth wrapped around the senses. We watched simple people sip bitter brews, not for escape, but for ease, for sleep, for silence. Then we walked beside Hildegard of Bingen, cloaked in visions and crushed mint. She gave voice to dreams through ink and chant, reminding youth that not all altered states are feared. Some are embraced as gifts, soft, radiant, and strange. We drifted further into mystery, where ritual smoke curled in the moonlight, and forgotten tinctures whispered through ancient texts. Archaeology offered quiet proof of what was long assumed, that the medieval world was not one of constant clarity, but of carefully managed veils, thin ones, porous ones. And in the final hour we stepped into the world of the elite, where comfort was curated, indulgence measured, and even mind-altering experiences were wrapped in luxury syrups. Oils and rare infusions replaced the coarse ale and smoky teas of the village, but the goal remained the same: softness, stillness, relief. Perhaps that is the most enduring truth of this topic, that across all classes and corners of the Middle Ages, the human desire to dull pain, invite sleep, or gently blur the harder edges of reality remained constant, not as a rebellion, not as a thrill, but as a quiet kindness offered to oneself. As you lie here now, wrapped in the warmth of the present, it is easy to forget how hard life once was. The cold, the silence, the labor, but perhaps in some quiet part of the past, there was always a cup, a blend, a ritual, a balm, something to help carry the burden, or lay it down for a time. So if your eyes grow heavy now, if your thoughts begin to drift, you are not alone. You are simply following a tradition that stretches back centuries, across stone and straw parchment and prayer. Close your eyes if you wish. Let the world fall away like smoke from a hearth, or the fading echo of a distant chant. And remember, in the long arc of history, even in the harshest times, people always found a way to soften the night. Sleep well, sleep deeply. This has been calm, boring, sleepy history. Good night.